Officer Sarah was well versed in handling traffic and highway blockages. She was used to assisting the townspeople of her small village. But today, she faced something entirely unexpected. The notice she received mentioned a little owl blocking the road. At first, she found it hard to believe. But once she arrived at the scene, she had to trust her eyes. There it was, a tiny owl, bravely standing in the middle of a two-way street, blocking the entire road. Its presence was barely noticeable compared to the massive cars and trucks passing by. Yet, the little owl made up for its size with its attitude, constantly hooting, hopping, and flying around, but never leaving its spot. It seemed as if it was defending something of utmost importance. The cars around it hesitated to advance, and the drivers felt relieved when they saw Sarah stepping out of her patrol car. They thought it was time for a professional to handle the situation. But the truth was, Sarah had no idea what to do, and she would have never believed what happened next. When an officer stumbles upon a lost hiker case, help comes from the strangest places. There were many things Officer Sarah expected to hear, but the notice of a little owl blocking the road wasn't one of them. She was well acquainted with handling the traffic and highway blockages, with dealing and helping with the townspeople of her small village. But something she had never heard before was the description of the scene she was called to. At first, it was hard for her to believe it, but once she arrived at the scene, she only had to believe her eyes. Even though the situation was incredible, a whole road of the two-way street was blocked by a tiny owl that stood bravely in the middle of it all. Its presence was barely noticeable when put in contrast with the humongous cars and trucks that passed through that way. But the little owl compensated with attitude what it lacked in size, constantly hooting and hopping and flying around the zone but never leaving its spot, as if it was almost defending something that was of utmost importance to it. The cars around it seemed hesitant to advance, so most of the drivers also felt relief when they saw Sarah stepping off her patrol. It was now time for a professional to work, or at least that was what the other truckers thought. But the truth was that Sarah also didn't know what to do, and especially because she would have never believed what happened next. Sarah approached the owl cautiously, holding her breath and with slow steps. She slowly crouched and opened her hand. Then the most surprising thing happened. Instead of flying away like Officer Sarah expected any other bird to do, the little owl instead hooted gently and hopped into Sarah's hand. Now that the bird was closer to her, Sarah noticed that it was not only an owl, but a beautiful baby owl, with slightly ruffled feathers and great yellow eyes. It kept emitting a series of soft hoots, insistent almost as if it was trying to communicate something. Officer Sarah already thought the scene was strange enough, but she didn't expect the even more unbelievable turn that the situation would take soon. First, she asked for the drivers and onlookers to give her some more space. They looked at her skeptically. One of them even muttered to himself, "That won't work. The little one is stubborn." Sarah had had her fair share of other animal cases, but it was mostly situations of lost dogs and cats stuck on trees. But the most important thing she had learned from those experiences was patience. And so she waited patiently for the bird to get a good grip on her gloved hand, and then she stood back up and carefully walked towards the end of the road, looked for a branch that wasn't too high nor too low, and tried to place her hand next to it so the tiny nightbird could jump back to safety and its normal life. But against what could be expected, as soon as it had the chance, the little bird jumped off from Sarah's hand and flew right back into the middle of the road, where once again it hooted adamantly and refused to move an inch away. The officer had to laugh. It was an unbelievable scene. What had first seemed like an easy, although a bit strange case was now making sense. She could picture perfectly how that brave bird had managed to not let any ground to the highway drivers. Every time anyone tried to move it away, the bird resisted and insisted on moving back in the middle of the road. "We already tried that," commented one of the onlookers, a truck driver named Rye. Luckily enough, he soon offered to help with the roadblock that was becoming every couple of minutes more and more extensive and convoluted. "We all want to get to our destinations, but we don't mean any harm to the bird." "Thank you. I think I now have a better idea of what we should do," Officer Sarah said as she took out her phone. With the help of Rye, who knew a good part of the other truck drivers, they created a detour using a nearby alley. And when asked about the situation, each of the drivers would inform the others that it was a better idea to take the detour as the principal road was blocked. And while doing this and redirecting the traffic, Officer Sarah had time to take a better look at the bird and try to figure something else out. It was at that moment that she noticed an even more unexpected thing. Once she was close enough to the bird, seeing it hoot gently and trying to push Sarah away, the officer managed to catch a metallic glint on the owl's leg that caught her attention. It was something hard to believe. What was it? Was it something it caught and was hurting the owl? Or something it had caught and wouldn't let go? She had no clue. Either thing, and once she had approached it to the right distance, she moved her hand and tried to touch whatever the thing on its leg was. It was strange. As soon as she approached her hand, the baby owl stood alert and pecked at her hand. Even if her hand was gloved, she could still feel the sharpness of its beak, so she moved away immediately. Sarah had to wonder what was the object that it was protecting so aggressively. Could it be something of worth? It held something like a metal coin in one of its small claws, and a metallic string was wrapped around its leg. Only more questions assaulted her mind when she managed to have a better look at the bird's leg. Something like a small blue gemstone had reflected the light against the officer's face. She had to plan carefully her following actions, but little did she know that the reality of this case was way more fantastic than whatever she had in mind. That's when she called Dr. Stephen Mitchell, the local wildlife expert of the town. She thought his experience and vast knowledge on birds of prey could be especially helpful to find a solution on how to deal with this unique creature, and to finally solve the mystery of the gemstone it carried on its leg, something that she just couldn't get out of her mind now, half due to her civic duties and half due to her own curiosity. "Hey Sarah, is everything okay?" The voice on the other side of the phone seemed tired, but it also had something smart to it. "I thought today was your work day. Is something the matter?" "Yeah, I'm okay," she answered back. "It's just this case. There's something strange to it. You see, there's a baby owl in the middle of the road and it refuses to move. Some birds are just stubborn. Don't think too much about it." At first, the doctor didn't think it was something special. He wouldn't be able to imagine what would happen next. "Anything else that seemed odd?" "I think it's bigger than that, Mitchell," Sarah continued. "You see, it's almost as if it was very insistently trying to communicate something important. Plus, it has a weird metallic cord attached to its leg. Can you come and take a look?" Stephen agreed, and just after a few minutes, an old and dirty SUV made its way to the scene. "You were right. This is strange," Stephen said after the first examination. "I thought I had some unusual experiences with birds, but I've never seen a case like this. And just what is that pendant on its leg?" The eyes of the little animal shone with innocence and determination. It wasn't aggressive nor afraid, but it also didn't plan to move a single inch away from its place. Why was it that I could touch it before, but now it resisted so much? By now, she couldn't deny that that unknown item should be of great worth to the bird. But how could they get to approach the bird and get a look at it without making it get defensive? "Owls are sensitive animals, Sarah," Dr. Stephen added. "Let's move slowly, show that we are not a threat, and that we want to help." The two of them tried to bond with the bird, moving in a calming motion until the little animal lowered its guard. It stared at them, trying to communicate something in that language with no words that only animals are capable of. Sarah extended her hand and hoped for the best. Then the little owl hopped gently onto her finger. It was almost as if it had recognized her. Now that they had the bird, they carefully moved it around to examine the pendant on its claw. The bird still hooted nervously, but perhaps it didn't feel that the two humans would do it any harm. It was the doctor who first recognized the unusual item on the owl's leg. "This is a trail marker pendant," he exclaimed. "Look at the design and its markings. That explains how it reflected the light. Two hikers used these to commemorate their journeys. But why would an owl have one?" Sarah asked herself and entered deep in thought. The hikers of the town were always prepared, and it wasn't usual for them to lose anything, much less a pendant like this. Perhaps this wasn't just the typical case of a lost item found by an animal. The officer couldn't help but think of the strange situation as a puzzle. On her hand was the right key, but what kind of door would it open? At least as if it had understood they were making progress, the bird finally relaxed and got off the road. It seemed to follow Sarah as she delved further into the case, and she would find her answer soon enough. Things took a shocking turn when they learned of Robert, a recent missing case in the hiking community. A local hiker confirmed that it was Robert's pendant and then showed a picture to the officer. Inside it, he was proudly holding the pendant. Things took a shocking turn when they learned of Robert, a recent missing case in the hiking community. A local hiker confirmed that it was Robert's pendant and then showed a picture to the officer. Inside it, he was proudly holding the pendant. Sarah's realization hit her hard. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Could it be that the bird had met Robert before? It was a crazy idea, but it was the only lead they had. For the good of Robert and his family, Sarah had to keep an open mind. She expressed her idea, doubtful at first, to her companion. That was now in Sarah's hand. She was shocked. Could it be that the bird had met Robert before? It was a crazy idea, but it was the only lead they had. For the good of Robert and his family, whom they met before asking for any indication of the trails Robert usually took, Sarah had to keep an open mind. She expressed her idea, doubtful at first, to her companion. Sarah, it's improbable, but it's possible. Dr. Stephen Mitchell. Nature works in mysterious ways, Sarah. Animals are smarter than we usually imagine. They have other senses, sharp and strange, that have led to countless stories as unbelievable as this one. Motivated, the strange group composed of the police officer, the doctor and the owl searched deeply into one of the paths that Robert might have taken, wishing to find him soon and safe. The baby bird was at the front, hopping and flying from branch to branch. It changed directions but didn't seem to be lost. Instead, it was determined to guide the pair. It was inspiring to see. They didn't only have a map, they had a guide from the animal world. Thanks to the owl's intuition, each step seemed to take on greater meaning. Each turn, each of its hoots and wing flaps were signs to be followed to get closer to their goal. In a way, it was almost like how a compass turns to the north. At first, they were shocked by the unexpected nature of their situation, but all of their doubts disappeared when they stumbled into the first clue they needed, an imprinted boot mark. From there on, they would catch all the other signs that had probably been left by Robert. A mark cut into a tree, footsteps, and branches broken by stepping here and there. The forest scenery was a story unfolding to their sight. The group could only hope to be on time to get to its good ending. Both Sarah and Dr. Mitchell would later agree that it was at that moment that their impression of the owl changed completely, from a cute, although strange animal to a noble soul capable of doing as much as any human being could. They were at ease knowing their winged companion was guiding them into the woods. After hours of trekking deeper and deeper, the group was led into a clearing. In the middle of it were the signs of a camp that had taken place not too long ago. A cold fireplace with some food cans thrown around revealed that a man had prepared dinner there at least a day ago. Sarah, this might be the last place where Robert camped. Then she pointed to the tent in the camp, slightly askew. Sarah, do you think we should check it? It was shocking. Everything was fitting into place. They couldn't believe what they found inside. In the tent was the hiker's diary. Stephen took the book and began reading it, his voice overwhelmed by emotion. The latest entries told the story of the unusual friend Robert had made, a little baby owl of ruffled feathers, whose description matched perfectly with the one that was following them. Officer Sarah had to hold her tears. Robert described his bond with the bird as unbreakable, as if they had made a bond and truly understood each other. "The owl is trying to help him," she said. Reinvigorated, we are so close now. We can't let them down. Together with both Robert's diary and the bird's guidance, finding the road wasn't as difficult. It was already dark, and the road that Robert had intended to conquer was one that was dangerous enough even with daylight. But they wouldn't back away now. The map indicated steep cliffs, hidden crevices, and overall an unstable terrain that the group wasn't accustomed to. They pressed on, combining all of their ideas in order to have a better shot at finding Robert. They decided to take out the map and retrace, according to the notes on the hiker's journal, potential stops that could take them to Robert's current location. After hours of walking and thinking, they had reached an obstacle. They couldn't think of any more routes. But at one moment, something incredible happened. The owl flew down and pecked a spot on the map. At first, it looked like just any random location, but Dr. Mitchell cross-referenced it with the diary and thought that the spot it pecked could actually be a possible direction. Just what kind of coincidence is this? Sarah asked herself. Maybe it wasn't a coincidence, the doctor answered. It was getting even darker, but the group felt they were following the right clues. While the doctor was making sure the route the bird had pointed to was possible, Sarah had to make some important calls connected with the local authorities. Sarah emphasized the importance of the case and the clues that they had found, omitting the parts that she couldn't completely believe herself, of course, asking for their help in exploring carefully the other routes and common hiking places of the forest. The notice was quickly shared, and the motivation of the people spread quickly like a fire. Friends and familiars and neighbors of Robert, the hiking community, and the local youth of the town were inspired and moved quickly to volunteer in the search. Stories of Robert's aid in helping to find him. They searched through slippery paths and foggy roads, climbing up and down and walking as if they were lost inside a great labyrinth. Unexpected dead ends, sudden drops and treacherous climb-ups combined with the beauty of the forest that had caught Robert's love. The world around them was both alive and dangerous to those that didn't tread around it with care and respect. The strength of all the groups were tested when the temperature suddenly dropped. It was at that moment that most of the volunteers decided to go home and try on another day. Robert's adventurous spirit was admirable, but the dangers of the landslide zones, the hidden pits, and the unstable grounds were things that couldn't be ignored. Yet Sarah's group remained, and together with the help of the forest police, they kept advancing and reached further into the forest, always in constant communication. As they approached certain areas, the owl's attitude changed too. It grew more alert and uneasy, hooting loudly and flying around, trying to catch what the humans couldn't. But sometimes even its eyes couldn't pierce through the lush pines and the canopies of trees. At one point, Sarah's group followed a dangerous road, keeping the trail of a shallow stream, narrow ridges and large boulders obstructing their way, but they had the feeling this was the right direction to Robert. As they made their way deeper through the forest, they had the sensation of entering into a terrain that belonged to another world. It was breathtaking how much things changed the deeper it was in the forest. Everything was silent, but they didn't feel any fear. Instead, just a great mix of admiration and respect for the nature that surrounded them. They couldn't afford to feel any fear right now, especially not now that Robert's life was on the line. And fortunately, their winged guide wouldn't let them falter, warning them on the roughest parts and keeping their spirits high whenever they got tired. The owl's signs got more insistent at a certain moment. It flapped its wings and pointed to specific directions with urgency. Were they on the right path? Sarah and Dr. Stephen were both tired, but they kept going on. It was not only a physical trial, but also a mental one. But just as they felt desperate when finding another dead end, their hopes and determination also raised when seeing the many clues and signs of life that Robert had left on its trail, like water bottles or torn pieces of clothing. In a sudden move, the bird jumped off Officer Sarah's shoulder and charged into the darkness of the forest. The officer and the doctor looked at each other in confusion, as the baby owl had never done that before. But afraid of losing their biggest help, they too gathered all their strength and sprinted into the dense foliage. They found it circling around a particular area like a natural spotlight with a sense of urgency. The two of them pointed their flashlights and soon understood its meaning. That must be the place that the owl had wanted them to find along just what was inside. Hidden on the forest floor, covered by fallen leaves and branches, was a hollow spot looking like a hidden entrance of sorts. It was a miracle if it was not for the insistence of their guide. They would have easily passed through that place without noticing anything. Going into the cave-like entrance, the officer also wondered how far the bird's loyalty would go, and if it would follow them even inside of the grotto. To her surprise, the bird grasped tightly to Sarah's shoulder and kept accompanying them. Venturing further, the group couldn't believe their eyes, but it was true. Robert, the hiker, was lying there. He was injured and dehydrated, and leaning against a wall of rocks. But even though his eyes were afraid and desperate, they still kept the spark of determination. A fragile smile emerged from his trembling lips, and when the owl flew at his side, he seemed to be looking at an angel. It was an emotive moment for all the parties involved, and Sarah couldn't hide her relief when announcing on her radio to the other policemen and volunteers, "We found him. Robert will be okay." Then they rushed to him, and while Sarah applied basic medical aid, offered him water. This moving scene was filled with words of comfort and a warmth that not only human but animal too, as the little bird wouldn't let go of the once lost hiker. It was unbelievable they had found him against all odds. While waiting for the rest of the rescue to come and take Robert back to safety and into a hospital, he told his story and relation with the little owl that had found him, and had just now practically saved his life. At this moment, it was clear that the bond the two of them shared was not only that of a human and animal, or that of a simple pet and an owner. It was a deep understanding between the two. At first it was just curious, but then it started following me everywhere. Then in my darkest moments, this little buddy kept me company and filled my heart with hope. Of course, I was afraid when it left me, but I had faith that it would return. I hoped that it would understand and that someone could understand the code and the pendant I gave him. And here you are. I would never doubt the intuition of an animal ever again. None of the involved would ever question the intelligence and the determination of the owl that had just now proved to be a true hero, an unexpected savior with feathers and a beak. Surely their story will never be forgotten by the town. It is a reminder that the connection between the world of humans and the world of Mother Nature hadn't been completely lost, and that if one paid enough attention, they would discover that the inner worlds of animals are way richer than what we can imagine. The word of Robert's unusual situation and his feathered companion spread around the town quickly, and the little owl was soon commemorated as a hero, celebrated far and wide in their little but close-knitted community. This tale concludes with Robert regaining slowly but surely his health, with his family thanking the amazing effort that the officer Sarah and the Dr. Stephen Mitchell did. But whenever these two were questioned, they immediately directed that gratitude to the true star of the story, that little owl that reminded us of the unpredictable ways in which nature works.